Okay, so now on to the final part of the episode, the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fame bubble case breakdown for Carlos Beltran. This was most of the work done for this was by Daniel Curren. So I think I'll have you sort of lead the discussion here.
Sure. So Carlos Beltran is in his second year on the Hall of Fame ballot. He debuted last year at 46.5% of the vote, and currently he is at 66.7% of the vote after there have been 123 public ballots revealed. My one of my Hall of Fame hot takes was that Carlos Beltran was going to have the largest year-to-year gain of any returning candidate on the ballot. As of right now, he has the largest net gained slash lost. He is, plus 11 in terms of the net gained this year, and no one else is above plus 8, which is Gary Sheffield. So as of right now, that take looks pretty good, but it certainly could change with the private ballots and the post-election public ballots. So as far as his on the surface stats, he had 70.1 baseball reference WAR and 67.8 Fangraphs WAR as a center fielder. And he had 44.4 peak WAR, which is point 0.3 below the average Hall of Fame center fielder. So he's right in with the average Hall of Fame center fielders in terms of peak WAR and also in terms of career baseball reference WAR. For his slash line total for his career, he slashed 279, 350, 486 for an 837 OPS, a 119 OPS plus in over 11,000 career plate appearances, which is a very large number for a career. Chris, you want to take it from here?
Yeah. So just looking at the basic numbers, a pretty impressive resume, although he didn't necessarily hit like the very, very celebrated numbers. He had 2,725 hits, 565 doubles, which is very, very impressive, 435 home runs, 1,084 walks, and 312 career stolen bases. So, got on base effectively with walks, lots of extra base hits with the home runs and doubles, and over 2,700 hits. And much of his resume revolves around the postseason. 307 average and 1021 OPS as a career in the playoffs with 256 plate appearances in the playoffs, like basically half a season's worth of production in the playoffs, and he had a 1021 OPS in them. And in the 2004 playoffs, he had a 1557 OPS in 56 plate appearances. And then the 2012 playoffs, he had an 1154 OPS in 50 plate appearances. So those specific runs are going to get, the recognition that he got, are going to get him the recognition that could push him to a Hall of Fame plaque. And he also won Rookie of the Year, although it was only once. He only won Rookie of the Year once, unfortunately. But just kidding. But he was a 9-time All-Star, 3-time Gold Glover, and 2-time Silver Slugger. So those are kind of where he appears on the surface. Just looking at the basic numbers, the things that everybody knows. But now we'll kind of go a little bit deeper into where he fully compared to people who had similar careers as he did.
Yeah, so I put Carlos Beltran through the Gionta test, as I like to call it, because you were the one that kind of started doing this thing where we compare guys with similar WAR given the number of plate appearances and the similar OPS plus given the number of plate appearances. So Carlos Beltran is one of a few players with 67 to 73 baseball reference wins above replacement in between 10,000 and 12,000 plate appearances. So that's similar body of work, similar overall production. The other guys to do it are Frankie Frisch, who is a Hall of Famer, Tony Gwynn, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer, Tim Raines, who is a Hall of Famer, Pudge Rodriguez, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer, Ernie Banks, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer, Greg Nettles, who received 8.3% of the vote in 1994. That was how he topped out. Dwight Evans, who received 10.4% of the vote in 1998. And Miguel Cabrera, who will be a Hall of Famer, a first ballot Hall of Famer in the year 2029. And in terms of players with a 115 to 120 OPS plus in 10,000 to 12,000 plate appearances is Roberto Alomar, who is a Hall of Famer, Luis Gonzalez, who was dropped in his first ballot, Darrell Evans, who was dropped in his first ballot, and Andre Dawson, who is a Hall of Famer. Keep that name in mind for later.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also what could be noted with the players with the 115 to 120 OPS plus in 10,000 to 12,000 plate appearances. So Gonzalez and Evans were first ballot drops, but Beltran had um, Beltran had what neither of those two had, which were both positive defensive wins above replacement and
Yes,
positive base
BSR.
running runs.
Eh,
Um,
positive base running runs doesn't even put it lightly. It doesn't even put
yes,
it the way that it truly is meant to be put.
yeah, Beltran had 55 career base running runs, which are really really a lot.
Yeah. Also a 67, I believe, BSR for his career.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. So he was really good whether he was stealing bases or taking extra bases on hits. He was an extremely good base runner. So he compares more to the Roberto Alomars and Andre Dawson's on that
Mhm.
particular list. Um, so now we go into the case against and the case for with guys we kind of think should be Hall of Famers. We typically do the case for last because there's just more to go off of. And guys we think shouldn't be Hall of Famers, we typically go with the case for first because we think there's more with the case against. So with Beltran, we sort of rank him as, you know, a Hall of Fame quality player. So we're starting with the case against. The first one is he only finished top 10 in MVP twice and only top 8 one time.
Yeah. Didn't get that big milestone very many times. I didn't really get a great chance at it except for once. One thing I'd also like to note before we completely dive into this, we have our opinions on Carlos Beltran. We still make an effort to give you the best case against and the best case for. Same goes for someone that we might be more against. We try to paint the picture as best we can with what people might say against them or for them, regardless of what we think. I tried to do my best with Carlos Beltran here, and Chris, you added some things that I think are very good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, we were very anti like the Omar Vizquel on the field like Hall of Famer, but we did provide a case for him that wasn't just completely memes. Um,
Yeah,
which yeah. Um,
yeah.
so
Anyway,
yeah,
yeah. Going forward, Chris mentioned the lack of MVP support. He also only finished top 10 in the league in OPS and OPS plus twice. So only twice could you say maybe he was a top 10 hitter in the league if that's what you prefer to go off of.
right. And with Beltran, um, as we mentioned with the on the surface stats, he didn't hit the major milestones that would make him a shoe in. Didn't get to 3,000 hits. Didn't get to 500 home runs. Like with Beltray, like his case is much more clear because he did hit the 3,000 hit threshold. And obviously, these things are arbitrary, but it
He
does
was
matter
pretty
when you're
darn close
talking.
to 500 home runs.
Yeah, we're obviously talking the um we're talking about the Hall of Fame where that stuff does get valued a little bit more than usual.
Hmm. Yeah. Additionally, he only had 3 seasons with an OPS plus of 140 or higher, and most people that only do that 3 times are not Hall of Famers. His offense wasn't absolutely otherworldly that much of his career.
Right, right. And going along with the legacy part and what he's remembered as, because that is a large part of why people vote the way they vote. Um, his most remembered playoff moment, despite having a 10-21 career OPS in the playoffs, is that curveball that he took right down the middle to end the Mets season in 2006, which was a promising season for them. That's kind of his most remembered moment. So I think that takes away a little bit from a lot of what the voters see him as.
Yeah, and perhaps the greatest flaw of his career in terms of his Hall of Fame case was the alleged role that he played in the 2017 Astros sign stealing scandal. There's been 1,000 different reports on who the perpetrator was of that. Some people say it was Carlos Beltran, some people say Brian McCann, some people say Alex Cora, some people say AJ Hinch, some people say Jeff Lunau. We don't really know. But Carlos Beltran was a veteran in that clubhouse. If there was a player that had uh, you know, the pedigree to step up and put an end to it, it was probably him. He chose to let it go and continue. However, I think there were also people that, were above him that also could have put a stop to it that didn't. So people can believe whatever they want or feel however they feel about Carlos Beltran's involvement in that scandal. it is something that to some people takes away from his Hall of Fame case.
Yeah, and I think everybody, it's sort of like steroids in that everybody has their own opinion on it. I think
Mhm.
some people believe that because of his involvement, all that all his accomplishments, get thrown out the window, and he shouldn't be considered at all. Some people might say that it just takes away a little bit, and that's why he's already sort of a bubble case, so maybe that's why he's not being considered like that. And then for other people, I think they just don't really consider it that much because it didn't really help his career, and they're only focusing on what he did on the field. And that cheating scandal didn't really impact his career at all, or at least numbers wise. um
Yeah.
so so now on to the case for Carlos Beltran, because that's all we have for the case against. For the case for Carlos Beltran, 70 career baseball reference WAR and 44.4 career peak baseball reference WAR are pretty much right in line with the average Hall of Fame center fielder. It's just that's kind of where guys are at, and yeah, like it's very comparative to a lot of the guys that are currently in the Hall of Fame right now.
Yeah, and going into his count statistics, Carlos Beltran is just one of 4 players in Major League history with 400 home runs, 300 stolen bases, and 1,000 walks. The other 3 players to have those are Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, and Willie Mays, who are arguably 3 players to have been the greatest of all time at their respective positions, and Carlos Beltran is right there with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Along with that, looking more sabermetrically, he's one of 3 players in baseball history with 250 plus batting runs, 50 plus base running runs, and 30 plus fielding runs. The other 2 are Willie Mays and Ricky Henderson, who are obviously all-time greats.
Yeah. He is also one of 6 players to have 300 offensive runs above average and 60 base running and 60 BSR, which is the Fangraphs metrics for total offensive production and total base running production. And the other 5 players to have those 2 metrics for their careers are Hall of Famer Ricky Henderson, Hall of Famer Tim Raines, Hall of Famer Billy Hamilton from the dead ball era, not the former center fielder for the Reds, Hall of Famer Joe Morgan, and future Hall of Famer Mike Trout.
Yes. And something that I definitely look at when I'm considering Carlos Beltran in the Hall of Fame spectrum is sort of that peak, because a lot of people might say, Beltran was an accumulator, and in some ways he was. But also from 2001 to 2008, Carlos Beltran only trailed Albert Pujols, Barry Bonds, and Alex Rodriguez in Fangraphs wins above replacement. So Pujols was the only clean player ahead of him from 01 to 08 in FWAR, and he also led baseball in base running runs, BSR. He had 10.2 more BSR than Ichiro and 600 less plate appearances. So even though Ichiro was probably getting more stolen bases, Beltran was just generally the better base runner because he was just more efficient with running around the bases in that time frame. But I think the biggest takeaway from that is he only trailed Albert Pujols, Barry Bonds, and A-Rod in FWAR from 01 to 08 in 8-year sample.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I put that in there is, if you go to any baseball fan and you ask them who is the best base runner from 2001 to 2008, almost everyone's going to say Ichiro, and that's fair because, Ichiro was kind of his prime, right? 01 it was his rookie year. Beltran was actually more efficient in less time though. So, and by quite a wide margin. So that's why I decided to put that in there. Carlos Beltran had 5 seasons with 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and 1 DWAR, which is baseball reference defensive WAR. And he had 5 of such seasons. That is the most of such seasons by any player in baseball history. No one else has had more than 5 seasons, or 5 seasons at least, with 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and 1 DWAR.
Yeah, for sure. Something so not to throw us off the sheet, but something that's not on the sheet, I'm just gonna add from my own thing, just going off base, very, very basic numbers here, and I'm trying to just highlight who is not a Hall of Famer on this list. But okay, so Carlos Beltran is one of 12 players with 400 plus career home runs and 550 plus career doubles. The only other non-Hall of Famers of those 12 are Barry Bonds, Albert Pujols, Adrian Beltre, and Rafael Palmeiro. all those guys either have not been Hall of Fame eligible yet or have been associated with PEDs. So 400 home runs and 500 doubles or 550 doubles are is a very exclusive club.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and he did both of those pretty easily. He is one of 7 players to have 4+ seasons with a 120 OPS plus or higher, 20 stolen bases, and 1 D-WAR. I put this list because I like one of my favorite lists ever. The other 6 to do it are Huey Jennings, George Davis, Eddie Collins, Hannes Wagner, Frankie Frisch, and Ricky Henderson. So in essence, he is the second player post integration to have 7 such seasons behind only Ricky Henderson. When you're talking about Huey Jennings and George Davis on the same list as you, and you played in the 90s and early 2000s, you're doing something right.
You're definitely doing something right for sure. He is also one of 8 players with 6+ seasons with a 500 slugging and 20+ stolen bases. He is joined by Ed Delahanty, Hannes Wagner, Nap Lajoie, Ty Cobb, Oscar Charleston, Willie Mays, and Barry Bonds. And if you add 1+ defensive WAR to that, he and Hannes Wagner are the only players in baseball history to have 4+ of such seasons with a 500 slugging, 20+ stolen bases, and 1+ D-WAR.
Yeah, and the only non-Hall of Famer on that list is Barry Bonds, who is a Hall of Fame talent who, is not a Hall of Famer due to his PED ties.
Yep.
Going forward, he and fellow ballot mate Bobby Abreu in 2004 were the last players to put up a season with a 130 OPS plus, 40 stolen bases, and 90 walks. So Ronald Acuna Jr. did not do that last year. No one has done it since 2004 when Beltran and Bobby Abreu did it.
And to go in on longer terms, he is one of 12 players to have 11+ seasons with 30+ doubles and 15+ home runs. He is joined by Stan Musial, David Ortiz, Albert Pujols, Lou Gehrig, Miguel Cabrera, Carlos Delgado, Craig Biggio, Adrian Beltre, Manny Ramirez, Todd Helton, and Bobby Abreu.
Yeah, so the last 4 on that are all five out of those 12 players currently on the ballot.
Yep.
Between Beltran, Adrian Beltre, Manny Ramirez, Todd Helton, and Bobby Abreu. And the last thing that I'll say for the case for Carlos Beltran, if you're a person that chooses to hold the 2017 season against him, at the time he was 40 years old and he had an 81 OPS plus. So you can't even really say that he benefited as a hitter with the sign stealing scandal. The only way that he benefited from it was that he, got a World Series out of it. You can choose to add that to his legacy if you want, but his overall offensive production would have been pretty similar regardless of if he had the sign stealing scandal access or not. And the last thing that I want to get into is that the most comparable player to Carlos Beltran in terms of his entire career, not just among Hall of Famers, but among really anyone, is Andre Dawson, who we mentioned earlier that is a Hall of Famer. Similar, body of work. Dawson played about 50 more games. Beltran had about, I don't know, like 400 more plate appearances. I think if my math is mathing, 300 more plate appearances.
Very similar amount.
Yeah, it's a very similar amount. Same body of work. Anyway, Andre Dawson had about 50 more hits. He had 3 more home runs. He had 4 more RBIs. He had 2 more stolen bases. They had the same batting average. Beltran was up on him by 27 points in OBP, by 4 points in slugging, by 31 points in OPS, and they were tied in OPS plus. Beltran had 1 more All-Star. Andre Dawson did have an MVP over Beltran. He did have more Gold Gloves and more Silver Slugger, but Beltran did have the advantage in D-WAR, very, very slightly. I believe it was 2.0 to 1.6 in their career, and he did dominate on base running in terms of efficiency. But, if you want to compare Carlos Beltran to a Hall of Famer or to just another baseball player by his career, Andre Dawson's the best guy to go off of.
Yeah, and looking at the stolen base comparison, like Dawson had 2 more, but also you think about the era Dawson played in, stolen bases were at the highest rate they've really ever been since the dead ball era. And also
Even
Beltran
before
got
the modern
caught.
era.
Yeah, even the modern era, like, and Beltran got caught like more than 50 less times on the bases, with stolen bases and whatnot. So, you know, Beltran was far better compared to the rest of the league at base running than Andre Dawson was, and that's why, according to Baseball Reference, base running runs, it's 55-14 in favor of Carlos Beltran.
Yeah.
Um,
And part of the reason I wanted to include this little comparison here is to shine a light on the BBWAA, something we don't do very often on this show. But Carlos Beltran is probably going to get in the Hall of Fame, and he's probably going to make it in at worst like his fourth or fifth year on the ballot. He debuted over halfway to 75% last year. He's probably going to get like 55 to 60% this year if he keeps on this pace. And that's in a bad year for gains, right? So next year, hopefully there's going to be like at least, three or four, maybe five guys leaving the ballot. And Beltran's going to have a much easier time gaining some more votes. It took Andre Dawson 9 years to get into the Hall of Fame via the BBWAA. So, you know what? They have gotten better at this. Not there's still a long ways to go, but we can appreciate some progress.
yeah, there we go. There we go. Love that. I appreciate the optimism. And yeah, there